The intergalactic council chamber buzzes with a constant hum, the endless chatter of delegates from dozens of species, each occupying their designated seats under the high vaulted ceilings, their eyes focused on the table, a massive disk of polished stone that gleams with artificial light. Humanity's turn had come at last. After years of navigating the depths of the galaxy, they finally secured their place in this room. Today was to be their moment of acceptance, but the reality could not have been more different. The humans stand together in a group led by Ambassador William Thorne, a man whose calm exterior hides the fire within. He had been preparing for this day his entire life. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as he walks to the center of the room. Behind him is a small team of human representatives, their eyes wide with the promise of something greater. They've traveled light years to be here, their hopes high, their futures tied to what would transpire in these moments. But their arrival was not met with cheers or applause, only cold silence from the other delegates across the table. The alien representatives sit with an air of superiority, their gazes fixed on screens, the technology of their kind far more advanced than anything humanity had built. But none of that could hide the dismissive tone in their voices. When they spoke, the first question was an insult wrapped in a veil of politeness, asking the humans to justify their place among beings who have lived for millennia. The question was directed at Ambassador Thorne, but it wasn't truly meant to be an inquiry. It was an evaluation, a test of human worthiness. Ambassador Thorne stood tall and took the challenge without flinching. He began to speak with a steady voice, his words calculated and deliberate. "We have lived on a single world for so long," he began. "We have fought battles and won wars, learned to build and rebuild. We are united by a common goal: to grow, to expand, to become something more than what we were before. We are explorers and survivors. We have the drive to not only join but to contribute to this council." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the air around him. The room was eerily quiet, but his presence seemed to fill the space now. And yet, as his speech finished, a cold laughter rippled through the room. It came from a towering figure, a member of the Velrethan species, whose pale blue skin shimmered under the light. Its long, spindly limbs and multiple eyes made it an imposing sight. He spoke next, his voice a mixture of mockery and amusement. "With all due respect, Ambassador," the Velrethan said, "you speak of things like unity and survival as if they are accomplishments. Surely these are the most basic traits of any species." The other delegates nodded in agreement. Some even sneered. The words cut through Thorne like a blade, but he did not show it. He stood his ground and waited for his moment to respond. He knew this was not just about words, but about proving their worth in action. Another alien stood up, a member of the Andrex species, its crystalline body shimmering with patterns of light. It spoke with a voice that was like chimes, clear and melodic. "The humans are far too young. They have no experience in the matters of the galaxy. They are too unpredictable, too volatile. They have not earned their place here at this table." A low murmur spread across the room at this. The humans sat in stunned silence. But Thorne's eyes narrowed with determination. He would not back down. They had been humiliated in the eyes of the galaxy once before, and he would not allow it to happen again. The time had come to make his choice, to leave or fight back. But before he could respond, the council's head delegate raised a hand, silencing the room with an air of finality. The decision was made. Humans would be allowed to present their case, but only as guests, and only under strict supervision. Their voices silenced before they could even speak their truth. It was then that Ambassador Thorne made a decision. He would regret nothing. He would not beg nor plead. Humanity had left the table before, but this time they would walk away for good and never look back. As Ambassador Thorne stood there, his heart racing, he could feel the weight of every eye in the room. He could sense the sneers and whispers from the other delegates, like invisible hands reaching out to mock and degrade them. The words of the Velrethan and Andrex still echoed in his ears, and yet something inside him snapped. This was not the time for diplomacy. It was not the time for explanations. There was no room for compromise. Not anymore. Thorne looked at his team standing behind him, their faces filled with uncertainty. They had been trained for this moment, but nothing had prepared them for the venomous atmosphere of the council. The silence was deafening. He took a breath and raised his hand, signaling his team to stand with him. One by one they rose slowly, their eyes meeting his with the same silent resolve. This was it. The humans had been given their chance, and it had been stolen away from them with a single gesture of disdain. No longer would they beg for acceptance. No longer would they beg for a place at the table. Without a word, Thorn turned sharply on his heel, his voice steady and calm, breaking the silence with a simple command: "We leave now." As the humans began to walk toward the exit, the shock was palpable. The other delegates remained frozen for a moment, unsure of how to react. It was as if the very air had shifted. The gravity of what was happening did not hit them immediately, but soon the murmurs started to grow louder as the humans made their way to the door. Thorn felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the right choice. Humanity would no longer bend to the will of those who deemed them lesser. But even as they reached the door, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Someone called out, trying to stop them. The voice came from the council leader, a creature whose form was composed of liquid metal that shimmered and morphed. As it spoke, "You cannot leave. This is a grave mistake." Thorn didn't stop. His steps were unwavering, and before the doors could close behind them, he turned back for one last look, his eyes meeting the stunned expressions of the council. He spoke in a voice that cut through the noise: "We were never your subjects, and we never will be again." As the doors closed behind him, the chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted across the room, some in anger, others in disbelief. The humans were gone, and they knew something had shifted, something irreversible. The council was left in disarray. Their carefully constructed order had been disrupted, but Thorn felt no fear as they made their way through the corridors of the council building. His team followed in silence, but there was a sense of unity among them. Something had changed in the air, and for the first time in years, they felt the weight of the future in their hands. As they left the building and stepped onto the ship waiting outside, the stars stretched before them. They were free from the shackles of a system that had never seen their worth. They didn't need the council. They didn't need approval from anyone. Humanity was a force unto itself, and the galaxy would soon learn that the humans were not the weak species they had once been considered. They were a rising power ready to make their mark, and nothing could stop them now. As the ship lifted off and the planet faded from view, Thorn looked out at the stars ahead of him. The galaxy had just been set on notice. Humanity was coming, and they would take their place, not as beggars, but as equals. As the human fleet departed from the council capital, the ship's crew moved in silence, each person absorbed in their thoughts. Some stared out at the stars, others were deep in discussion about what had just happened, but beneath it all there was an unmistakable sense of purpose. The humans knew something that no one else in the galaxy seemed to understand. They had just unlocked a power that could reshape everything. The council had underestimated them, but humanity's true strength lay not in their technology or sheer numbers, but in their ability to adapt and evolve faster than anyone could predict. No sooner had they returned to their home systems than the first signs of their new strength began to emerge. The humans had always been resourceful, but with the freedom to innovate without restrictions, their ingenuity skyrocketed. They broke down the barriers of physics that had once limited them, discovered new energy sources that even the most advanced races had never dreamed of, and began to engineer machines and weapons that seemed almost impossible. Ships larger than anything seen before, capable of traveling between star systems with minimal energy, ships that could take on entire fleets with devastating precision. In the deepest recesses of their laboratory, scientists worked tirelessly to create new technologies, weapons that could tear apart entire cities in seconds, shields that could deflect any attack, and weapons that turned their very environment into a weapon. Their greatest minds had been freed from the constraints of bureaucracy, and now nothing seemed impossible. The humans were no longer content with being passive. They were eager to show the galaxy their capabilities, to prove that they were more than just survivors of their homeworld. The humans began constructing the first of their new warships in secret, each one a masterpiece of design and power, and as they did so, they quietly sent messages to the colonies spread across the galaxy, telling them of the new direction humanity was taking. No longer would they be confined to the shadows. They would make their presence known. They would grow stronger than any other species, and nothing would stop them. Soon the first human fleet was ready, not just for defense, but for conquest. With their technology honed and their resolve unshakable, the humans took to the stars. But they didn't just march into the council's territory. No, they began to spread outward. They targeted weak points in the galaxy, places that had been overlooked by the so-called established powers of the Council. They set their sights on the fringes of the galaxy, on planets long forgotten by the larger races. These planets held resources untouched by the rest of the galaxy, perfect for expansion. And as the humans made their way into these territories, they encountered no opposition. The other species did not yet know what was happening, too busy with their internal politics to notice the quiet rise of a new power. Soon humanity's colonies were popping up on planets all over the galaxy, thriving, growing faster than anyone had ever imagined. At first, the Council took little notice, but when human ships began appearing on the borders of their territories, when they began to claim vast stretches of uncharted space, the alarm bells started to ring. The other species began to take notice. But by then it was too late. Humanity was no longer a fledgling race trying to earn its place at the table. They had moved beyond the need for permission. The galaxy was theirs to claim, and they would do it with the fierce determination they had shown time and time again in their history. No longer would they be ruled by others. They would carve their own future and make the galaxy bend to their will. It was the beginning of a new age, and humanity was ready to rise. The Valthor had always been known for their aggressive nature. Their brutal invasions and unrelenting conquests made them one of the most feared species in the galaxy. When the human colonies first began to expand into uncharted regions, they had paid little attention to the humans, dismissing them as insignificant or irrelevant. But when reports started trickling in about the human advancements, their first true response came in the form of an invasion fleet. The Valthor were confident that this would be a simple exercise in power. The humans had no experience in warfare. They had no understanding of the vastness of the galaxy or the power of a race like the Valthor. They would crush them without breaking a sweat. Or so they thought. When the human colonies on the edge of the galaxy were first attacked, the Valthor thought they had caught the humans off guard. Their ships stormed through the outer rim with devastating speed. They tore through the defenses of the small human colonies with little resistance. The humans had never been able to defend themselves against such an overwhelming force. The Valthor's confidence grew, but what they did not anticipate was the speed at which humans adapted. Their war machines were old and slow by galactic standards, but the human will to survive was unmatched. The humans didn't retreat, they fought back. With everything they had, their ships now outfitted with new technology that the Valthor had never seen before. The first battle took place on the edge of a dying star. The Valthor's flagship moved to destroy the human defenses. But in a sudden maneuver that no one saw coming, the human fleet surrounded them like a net, closing in on prey. The Valthor captain screamed orders as his ships tried to break free, but the humans were already there, using weapons designed specifically to counter the Valthor's superior shields. The humans disabled the flagship in one precise strike, and it fell to the star below. The humans had won the first battle, and they had done it against one of the most feared species in the galaxy. But the victory was not without cost. The human losses were significant, and their fleet was left battered, but their determination was unyielding. The Valthor retaliated immediately. They launched counterattacks across the human colonies, sending waves of ships to try and break the human resolve. But each attack met the same fate. The humans had learned from their mistakes. They no longer fought with brute force alone. Now they used strategy, innovation, and guerrilla tactics. They had the advantage of knowing their territory better than the Valthor could, and that knowledge made all the difference. The battles grew more intense, and the Valthor's confidence began to crumble. The Valthor had underestimated the humans in every way. They had thought the humans were weak, but now they knew the truth. Humanity was not to be trifled with. Each victory the humans won pushed the Valthor farther back, and the galaxy began to notice. Whispers spread through the council halls that something had changed. The humans were not the feeble race they had once been. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and the Valthor found themselves on the defensive, something they had never experienced before. Now, it wasn't just about winning, it was about survival. As the last of the Valthor fleet retreated to their homeworld, they knew one thing for sure: they had made a grave mistake, and they would never forget the day they underestimated humanity. The news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Council had once thought humanity insignificant, But now their rise could not be ignored. The Valthor had been a powerful threat, one that no one had dared challenge for centuries, and yet humanity had wiped them from the stars in a matter of months. With each victory, their power grew. The Council was forced to take notice. Their complacency had blinded them to the growing storm. At first, they had dismissed humanity as nothing more than a passing nuisance, but now they were left scrambling to understand how the humans had achieved such an impossible feat. The Council convened in an emergency session. Delegates from every species gathered in the vast chamber, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger, confusion, and regret. The humans had done something no one had expected. They had fought back against the Valthor with a ferocity and brilliance that left the galaxy reeling. They were no longer the weak upstarts they had once been considered. They were now a formidable force, and their growth showed no sign of stopping. The leaders of the Council could no longer deny the truth. Humanity was rapidly becoming a new power in the galaxy, one that threatened to upset the established order. The first to speak was a member of the ancient Jirta race, whose long lives had allowed them to accumulate knowledge across millennia. They were often seen as the intellectuals of the galaxy, and their presence in the Council held great weight. The Jirta delegate stood up and addressed the room in a voice that echoed across the chamber. It is clear that the humans have surpassed our expectations. Their technological advancements alone should not have been possible in such a short time. The question we must answer is, how did they do it? And what does this mean for the future? The room fell silent. The Jirta's words carried a heavy weight. The other delegates murmured among themselves, still grappling with the implications of humanity's rise. The Anthrax delegate spoke next with a calm, measured tone. They were a species that prized logic above all else. The humans have proven that they are not bound by the limitations we have imposed on them. They are adapting too quickly, too efficiently for us to control. They are evolving at a pace we cannot match. There was a pause as the Council members absorbed the information. The implications of what was being said were clear. The humans had broken free from the mold that had been set for them. They were not bound by tradition or the way things had always been done. They were unpredictable, dangerous, and utterly determined. Another delegate stood, a member of the Iksha race, a species known for their ruthlessness and military prowess. They were the first to challenge the Jirta's conclusions. We cannot ignore what they have done. We cannot let them continue to grow unchecked. They are a threat to all of us. Their presence in our galaxy disrupts the balance the Council has worked so hard to maintain. As soon as the Iksha spoke, the chamber erupted into heated debate. Accusations flew, and tensions rose to a boiling point. While they argued, the truth was becoming clear. The Council had failed to act quickly enough. Humanity had grown beyond their reach, and now they were no longer the underdog they had once been. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and the Council was left struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Humanity had been underestimated, and in doing so they had been allowed to grow beyond anyone's control. Their regret was too late. The humans were already gone from their sight, and already claiming new territories and forging alliances that would soon see them ruling the galaxy. The rest of the Council knew that the future would be defined by humanity's rise, but the question remained, would they be able to stop it, or had they already lost control forever? The Council's panic continued to grow as the humans spread farther across the galaxy. Their colonies flourished on worlds once thought impossible to settle. Their technology continued to advance at a rate that none of the other species could match. Their military power was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, and every attempt to stop them had failed. The Council could no longer ignore the reality before them. They had underestimated humanity at every turn, and now they were paying the price. They needed to act fast. They needed to send emissaries to Earth to negotiate peace or risk facing an unstoppable enemy. The Council convened again in an emergency session. This time, the stakes were higher than ever before. The Valthor were a distant memory, their once proud fleets scattered and broken, but the humans were growing stronger by the day. And if they were not dealt with soon, the balance of power would permanently shift. The decision was made. Emissaries would be sent to Earth to try and broker a deal. The humans had made their point. They had proven their strength, and now it was time for the galaxy to come to them on their terms. The emissaries set off in ships equipped with the best technology the Council had at their disposal. Their mission was clear: offer the humans peace or face a galaxy-wide war. They had no other choice. When the emissaries arrived at Earth, They were met not with hostility, but with quiet assurance. The human leaders welcomed them with open arms, but it was clear that the power dynamic had changed. The emissaries were ushered into a meeting room, where Ambassador Thorne was waiting for them. They sat in silence for several moments before Thorne spoke with a calm yet firm voice. "Welcome to Earth," he said. "We're glad you finally decided to join us." The emissaries were taken aback by the tone of his words. They had expected to find a humbled race willing to negotiate. They had expected to find a people eager to accept terms. But instead, they were met with a quiet confidence that unsettled them. "We understand why you've come," Thorne continued, "but make no mistake. This isn't about us begging for your forgiveness or approval. Humanity doesn't need your permission anymore." The emissaries exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. They had no idea what to make of Thorne's words. Their entire mission had been based on the assumption that they could control the humans, that they could pressure them into submission. But now they realized how wrong they were. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes locked onto theirs. "We are offering you a choice," he said. "Join us as equals or face the consequences." The emissaries were stunned by the boldness of his statement. They had expected diplomacy, not a threat, but it was clear now that humanity had no interest in being anything less than a full partner in the galaxy. And if the Council refused to acknowledge their place at the table, humanity would take it by force. There was a long silence before one of the emissaries spoke. "We do not want war," they said, "but we cannot ignore the truth. Either humanity has proven that it will not be ruled by us. You have forced our hand." The emissaries were dismissed shortly after that, but their words were enough. The message had been sent. The Council could no longer afford to treat humanity like a lesser species. The humans had made it clear that they would not settle for anything less than equality, and the rest of the galaxy would have to decide whether they would stand with them or against them. As the emissaries left Earth, their ships were silent. Their mission had failed, but the consequences of their failure were still unknown. The emissaries returned to the Council, their failure evident in their eyes. The news of their defeat spread quickly, and the reactions were swift. The Council members could no longer pretend that humanity was a passing phase. They had underestimated the humans at every turn, and now they faced the consequences. The choice was clear. Either the galaxy would accept humanity as an equal, or they would face a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Council was divided. Some still held on to their old beliefs that humanity could be brought to heel. Others saw the growing power of the humans and realized that any conflict with them would lead to the extinction of countless species in the galaxy. A decision had to be made, and soon the humans were not waiting for the Council's approval anymore. They had already begun to form alliances with other species. Those who had once been ignored now flocked to humanity's side. The galaxy was changing, and the Council could no longer control the flow of history. The news of humanity's rise reached the farthest corners of the galaxy, where the old and forgotten races lived in isolation. These species had long been ignored by the galactic powers, their voices drowned out by the larger civilizations. But now they saw an opportunity in humanity's rise. They saw a chance to rise up as well. In the shadows, new alliances were forming between humans and these forgotten races. And as these new coalitions grew, so did humanity's power. The rest of the galaxy watched in silence, unsure of which side to take. The Council continued to argue among themselves, their bickering louder than ever. But they all knew one thing for certain: the galaxy was on the brink of a new era. Humanity had changed the rules of the game. They had refused to remain in the shadows, and now they were taking their place at the table. The question was not whether they would be accepted, but whether the rest of the galaxy could afford to stand in their way. The time for diplomacy was over. The humans had made it clear they would no longer beg for equality, they would take it. And if the Council refused to accept this new reality, humanity would carve its own future with the power they had earned through blood and sacrifice. Ambassador Thorne stood before the human fleet as it prepared for the next phase of their plan. The ships were massive, far beyond anything the Council had ever seen, and they were prepared for war should it come. But Thorne knew that it did not have to come. There was still a chance for peace. The Council had one last chance to choose a path of cooperation or face the inevitable war that would follow if they refused humanity's terms. The stars above were silent as the human fleet began to move towards the galactic core. They would not stop. They had already proven that they could not be stopped, but now it was up to the Council to decide whether the galaxy would face the dawning of a new age, or whether it would be torn apart in the wake of humanity's unstoppable rise. The Council's regret had come too late, and now the galaxy would have to live with the consequences of their actions. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were the future, and nothing would stand in their way.